Thanks, Mike. It's been fun with Mike to put together these series of anthropology lectures for like 7 years. We're pretty sure by the time we become intellectual ancestors, the idea of an anthropology department will take root, and we'll have one here at Villanova. So it's just around the corner, I think. But and I also have to thank Joyce, because she sets up everything these days. So thanks for all of your work. And I have to thank Diane and Joan, because this whole thing is their idea. We were talking a couple of months ago, and this topic came up, and they said, well, you ought to say something about it. You're supposed to know something about it. So I thought, okay, it sounds like fun. Because it's a fun topic, isn't it? Yeah, it's always nice to talk about the end of the world. You know, yeah, you've probably seen some of the great movies, the classics, you know, I mean, Gone with the Wind, Casablanca, and I hope you've seen 2012. If you haven't, you know, there are some really classic and memorable scenes that we have to see here. If I can get this to work. This year, what are the odds? Okay, there's not much more to say than that, huh? There's a couple, I loved it when I was watching the Super Bowl and this came up too. Did you see the Chevy ad on the Super Bowl? I think it's a great ad. I love this one.
Chevy Silverado. From the beginning of your workday to the end of the world. Chevy with me.
Isn't that great? I love it. I just got to show you one more. The Ameritrade ad. I just saw this on TV a couple of days ago. Maybe you've seen this one.
21st, polar shifts will reverse the Earth's gravitational pull and hurtle us all into space, which would render retirement planning unnecessary. But say the sun rises on December 22nd and you still need to retire. TD Ameritrade's investment consultants can help you build a plan that fits your life. We'll even throw in up to $600 when you open a new account or roll over an old 401k. So who's in control now, Lions?
Actually, the first one, the trailer for 2012, got one little thing right. I don't know if you noticed one of the little pop-up phrases that said, "The end is just the beginning." Actually, that's a great Maya observation. That's something that I'll be repeating ad nauseum here. But a few more things from kind of popular culture. Yesterday, of course, was the spring equinox. So people flock down to, this is Chichen Itza, that's the temple of Kukulkan, which is the feathered serpent. And people go down there, sometimes at the equinox, sometimes at the winter or summer solstice. By the way, we just got into spring. You've got until the winter solstice. So, just keep your schedule in mind. But people love to go to this because on these particular days, this is actually a very cool building. As you see, I didn't bring the cool little pointer, so I have to point. There's 9 levels here. That's because there's 9 levels of Xibalba, the underworld. That comes up all over the place. And then there's, of course, 4 sides. Unlike the Egyptian pyramids, Maya pyramids, as a rule, have stairs. There's 90 stairs on each side. 90 times 4 is 360. Then if you go inside the little cave up at the top, again, it's not that nice point of the Egyptian pyramids. The whole idea of this is for the big shots, the kings, to walk up these stairs and then go inside that little cave where there are 5 steps. So, not too surprisingly, there's 1 step for every day. And then at these particularly important times of year, the sun hits these 9 levels just such that it creates this kind of wavy shade on the stairs. I don't know if you can see it, but the shade perfectly meets on these days the serpent's head down at the bottom. That's a big deal if you're a Maya, and you're very impressed by that because the serpent's not a symbol of evil like serpents are in Christian and Judaic culture. Serpents are really cool because they crawl along our land, right? They crawl down into the underworld, into holes, Xibalba. They also can slither up trees and go up into the sky. So the serpents connect the different levels of our reality. And there's stuff, gods live up there and gods live down there. And so the serpents are able to do that. They're able to connect those different levels. And so what the king is saying when he climbs up here on ceremonial days with all the admiring throngs beneath. And by the way, instead of grass at that period, it would have all been covered with this limestone white or sometimes painted red, a big flooring here. So you have the adoring throngs down here. You watch the king climb up there. He goes inside the little cave. He does some self-flagellation and bloodletting, which imitates the Popol Vuh story in which the gods mix corn with their blood and inside the cave of the mountain, and they make people out of that. And so what he's claiming to do is to be like the gods, and then he comes back out and everybody's cheering, and he is carrying out the right rituals to give birth to a new period of time, which is what the whole calendar is about, and I will harangue you about this more in the future. This has become sort of a new agey thing, so now people go down and they follow this with this sort of thing in mind. But I'll come back to that. There's other profound things on the web. I'm not going to give you this. This is an hour-and-a-half lecture by Carla Ruckert. You can Google and listen to hers. She discusses what the Mayans, Western astrology, and the philosophy of the law of one offered by those of Ra say about 2012. I did listen to part of it, but you understand it about as well as I do right now. So but it's a good thing to listen to if you have any interest in that. And then, of course, there's the Maya horoscopes, which you can consult. Today, of course, is 3/21, which is Tucan. I'll tell you a little bit about the Maya calendar in a minute, but today is Tucan. And Can, you'll be glad to know, keep this in mind as you go through the rest of your day, symbolizes the power of the universe and the heat of Can and the first rays of light. It's the movement and creator of the universe. It's the sign of wealth that multiplies good things. It's a very strong day. This is good to keep in mind. So there's all these different ways of using the Maya culture to think about their calendar. And so, all right, so we've had some of these popular culture things here. So let's just talk for 2 minutes about some of the ways that we think about the end of the world before we talk about the Maya. Then let's talk a little bit about what the ancient Maya thought about that, as opposed to what popular culture right now is saying, what the Maya say about that. What could any of that mean for contemporary Maya? You know, it's common, for example, that people talk about the collapse of Maya civilization, right, hundreds of years ago. And then that's sort of the end of the story. Of course, the Maya didn't go away. There's still millions of them in Guatemala and Chiapas and Belize and so on. So the Maya didn't disappear. They just stopped building those types of temples and carving big stone stela. But they're still around. So what, if anything, do these ideas mean for the Maya who are still around? And is there any point for us to talk about this? We'll end up with that. Now, remember, in our Christian tradition, Bart Ehrman argues that Jesus was an apocalyptic, that he expected the end of the world within his own lifetime. And he kept telling people that within their generation, they would see the end times. Now, he didn't mean that the whole world was going to blow up. He meant that there was going to be the reign of justice after a period of violence and injustice. But it would have cosmological features to it. The sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from the sky. And I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. So maybe Jesus was expecting this rather sooner than later. And there's certainly been a steady stream of people since Jesus speaking in Jesus' name, predicting this. Remember about a year ago, we had this 80-year-old fella who was predicting the end of the world. Every year or two, there's somebody up on a rooftop waiting for the end of the world for some reason. This seems to be something we're fascinated by, isn't it? I mean, and who wouldn't be? I mean, if you can predict the end of the world, that's going to attract attention. And what the end of the world means is something. So we've certainly got this in our own Christian tradition. In our scientific age, we've said, yeah, the world's already ended a bunch of times. In the sense not of the whole world blowing up, but in the sense of the vast majority of life forms having gone extinct at least 5 times since life evolved, and became complex a half a billion years ago. So we've had these different periods of time in which 75% of the species became extinct, 48% of all genera, 57%. I mean, these 5 different great periods where there has been the end of the world, for one point of view. Maybe we're living during the 6th end of the world right now with the numbers of species going extinct, and maybe we will be the last one in line. That's what some people seem to be worried about. So there's been at least 5 periods in which the world has ended, according to biologist types or geologists, and maybe we're in the 6th one right now. When I was a kid, we were worried that the world was going to blow up in a nuclear war, and that really would be the end of it, that we would all die in a nuclear winter. So we expected that. Or now, in our more environmental period, we're worried about global warming and other types of environmental disasters, perhaps making the Earth unsustainable for human life. Bacteria and cockroaches will do just fine, but we may be gone sooner rather than later, especially when you think that 99.9% of all species that have ever existed are extinct. I mean, what makes us think that the end isn't coming within some period of time? It's just a question of exactly when it's humanity's turn. So we've got these ideas. Or maybe the end isn't near, maybe the end is far. I understand the astronomers tell us that the sun has a lifespan like everything else does. It's only halfway through its life cycle, more or less. But as it gets towards the end of its life cycle, in what's 5 billion years or something, it turns into a red giant. And then it's 93 million miles away from us now, or whatever it is. It's going to be on our doorstep by that point. And then first it'll evaporate the oceans, and then it may engulf the rest of the world. And that really will be the end of things. That's truly curtains. But not to worry, that's not for 5 billion years. There's virtually no chance that the human species exists for 5 billion years. No species has lasted that long. So this is not something we have to be concerned about right now. All right, so we've got our own ideas about the end of the world. And we have that it's either happened a number of times, that it could be happening, that it will happen in various genres. The Maya have ideas about the end of the world, and it gets incorporated into their classic book called the Popol Vuh, which is their kind of Bible. And it comes out of their experience. Now think a little bit, before we get into all of the cultural stuff, of what most people's lives have been since the agricultural revolution and since the Maya and some of their predecessors began cultivating maize or corn in the central Mexican valley about 5,000 years ago. Year after year after year after year, it's the same darn process, right? I mean, you have two major seasons, a rainy season in which things grow and turn green and everything. Then you've got a long dry season. Everything turns brown. California has this. They euphemistically call California the golden state. You've been out there during the dry season. It's the brown state. Everything's dead. And that's what the Maya and all of the other groups in this area learned. They went for months with essentially no rain. You better have stored up enough food during the green season to get through that dry season. And if that dry season lasts a little bit too long, or if you didn't save quite enough food, there's no store to go to pick up groceries, right? And the problem of famine is real. The problem of the end of the world at the end of the dry season is something that people live with. Death is much more part of most cultures' life than it is for us. We very happily have gotten rid of death. People die in hospitals. They get buried out of town in places where dead people belong. You can go for decades without anybody dying in your immediate family. And at least in my religious tradition, now we don't even have funerals anymore because open caskets is sort of a drag. We have memorial services, have you noticed, where we remember the person, but we don't have to look at the dead body, which is so unbecoming. So we've sort of excluded death from our culture. So many agricultural cultures have death as a part of them. For one, lifespans are relatively shorter. You get to be 40, you're an old timer. People die younger. Half of your children are going to die before age 5. When they die, they stink in Mesoamerica quickly. You need to bury them fast because there's a smell of death that comes really quickly. And the appearance of bodies change in this hot climate. So, I mean, death has a feel and a texture and a smell and an immediacy. End times come. This is not a shocking thing for the Maya to think. In fact, it's sort of the warp and woof of life. I mean, people die, right? And so sometimes they die in large numbers. I mean, it's part of their lived experience. And it's part of this agricultural season in which plants die and all of that kind of stuff. And they live, now we have tectonic theories to explain why they live in the ring of fire, right? The tectonic plates that go Japan, Aleutian Islands, down to San Andreas Fault, Central America, and down the Andes Mountains, right? But they're living right in the middle of this. So they're suffering earthquakes fairly frequently. They have hurricanes fairly frequently. So if the rains do come, they can come too hard, and that can cause just as many problems because they don't have hurricane-proof housing there. They've got wattle and daub housing, which just blows away very often in the hurricanes. So they live in a culture where the end times actually is part of their lived experience. This is not something which is just a big dramatic thing in the future. It's something that we sort of live with. That gets incorporated in part, I think, in their creation story. Their gods, they have the gods create the world, just like we have in our Genesis account. But they don't quite ever get it perfect, and the gods make mistakes. So they have to try time and time again. So we're in the most recent creation cycle, but there's been failed creation cycles and extinctions before that. The gods tried making people out of mud. That's what our God did, right? He created us out of the dust of the earth. Well, that's what their God did the first time, because they wanted to create people for much the same reason. They wanted people to remember them, keep track of the days, carry out rituals, worship them, do all the things that people are supposed to do. Except the mud people didn't do it. In the sun, they cracked, in the rain, they got kind of sloppy. They just didn't handle things correctly at all. And Ischel, who's the goddess of the moon, just got ticked off with the whole crowd of them, and she took her big water bucket and poured water and flooded out the mud people. And the gods tried to create people. It didn't work out. They didn't do what they were supposed to do, so off they went. And so there's a creation and a destruction story back in the past somewhere. The gods still want people, so they try again. So they make people out of wood. So you have the wooden people. Same thing. These people have no fat. They have no character. They have no charisma. They don't carry out the things that they're supposed to do. The gods get angry and they turn them into monkeys. I don't know what's wrong with monkeys, but that's what they did. So they tried a second time and destroyed them. So we've had two creation, two destructions. The end of the world's come. It's come twice already. And so they try a number of times. Then part of the Popol Vuh is getting rid of the imposter gods. I won't go through the whole thing, but here's one of them here. The hero twins, who are heroes, it create an earthquake and they kill the imposter god. Well, you have to kill the bad gods, and you have to have exhausted all of the other attempts to try to create people, and then go through the ends of the world, and then try to still create people. That's the whole point. That's what the Popol Vuh is about. Trying to create people and trying to figure out how they should behave, what their ethics ought to be. But we're not there yet. So what do we need to do to have a people? Ball courts are everywhere in Mesoamerica. They love playing ball. This is a ball court, by the way. It seems as though this is part of the court. This is at Copan. This is a nice ball court, but this basic pattern is all over the place. There's hundreds and hundreds of ball courts in the ancient Mesoamerican world. And then people are standing all around here, and then there's a few players playing on the field here below. It's kind of like soccer. It's a big rubber ball. It's very heavy. If you just hit it with your arm, you'd probably break your arm. So there's big things you wear around, girdles you wear around your waist, and you kind of hit it with that. And exactly how they scored, nobody seems to know. But everybody plays ball all over the place. In the Popol Vuh, the hero twins play ball. Right under this is a thin membrane, and underneath that thin membrane is where the gods of Xibalba live. And they can hear all this racket up there. And they get really irritated with the ball players, the hero twins who are playing ball up there. So they demand that they come down into the underworld, and they give them all kinds of tests, which the hero twins fail. And I'm not going to go through the whole story because it's going to take too long, but the hero twins end up getting killed, and they're buried underneath the ball court. But then miraculously they're able to father children, and there's another set of hero twins which come down and they pass all the tests, and they are able to resurrect their fathers, the previous hero twins, and that's what's happening here. They've got a split turtle shell. This is the ball court. You see there's that same V-shaped thing. The turtle shell represents the earth. Turtles are cool because they can swim under the water, and then they can rise up above the water. You see the shell breaking the surface of the water, just like the land broke the surface of the primordial waters, and so that's how we had creation of land. So the turtle is the earth. Down here, underneath the surface of the earth, is the land of Xibalba, the land of the dead. Here's a nice skull, right? So that's where the dead guys go to live, down there. And so the hero twins had been buried in the land of the dead, but now their sons, the next set of hero twins, do stuff that any farmer in Mesoamerica can relate to. they cultivate the land, they take care of the crop, they water it, and out sprouts their father, who is the maize god. See, here's all the maize foliage up here. And then we have the source of corn, of maize. They take the maize from the maize god, they give it to this guy's mother, and she mixes it with her blood in a cave and creates humanity. So who are the Maya? Who are people? They're the people of corn. What do you do every time you eat a corn tortilla? It's like going to Mass, right? I mean, what do we do when we go to Mass? We eat the body of Christ, right? What do they do every time they eat a corn tortilla? They eat the body of the maize god. They take it in, and it becomes part of them, and it's a religious ritual. This whole thing, as far as I can see, is giving all kinds of meaning to otherwise really boring work. I mean, I don't know if you've ever done farming. My family, they left Sweden because it was cold and rocky, and they went to Minnesota. Swedes are nice, but whatever. But farming is backbreaking, mind-numbingly repetitive, boring work. But if you're thinking up stories like this, you're giving cosmological meaning to those daily activities, that stuff that you're doing. What are you doing when you take care of a little corn plant? This is all the stuff that you're doing. And so these stories have tremendous resonance for the Maya, but what they're interested in is this cycle of birth, the plant being born from the soil, and then its life, and it gives fruit, and then the thing dries up and dies, and then the seeds die. They thought the seeds were dead. And how do we know we're made out of corn, by the way? Just look, you got a bunch of corn kernels there. What do babies look like when they're born? Kind of funny pointed heads. They look like cobs of corn, don't they? They're kind of squished together. I mean, and that's beautiful. In fact, if you're a mother, you want to maintain that. So you tie boards on the baby's head, not hard, just with a little bit of pressure to keep that nice cone look. Because that's when you're really beautiful, is when you look like what you really are, and what you really are is a corn. So we're the corn people. And the corn goes through this cycle of birth, life, death, and rebirth. So what happens every season? It's the end of the world. And what's magical about resurrection? This is resurrection, right? The resurrection of the corn god. We have a resurrection in the Christian tradition. We just think it happened once. And if you're conservative, you say, yeah, it really happened. Jesus was raised from the dead. And if you're liberal, you say, it has symbolic meaning, but I don't know that it really happened. But it happened once in either case. These guys say it's magical and it's wonderful, but it happens every year if you do the right stuff. You have to take care of the corn. You've got to prepare for it. You've got to know when to plant it. You have to know all this stuff. So if you do the right stuff, and if you keep track of the days, and if you keep track of time carefully, you can give birth to the next period of time and live for one more season and stave off the end of the world. You don't do it right, or you hit some bad luck, then things don't work out, and death will come along. All right, for all these reasons, they're interested in predicting the future. And they have codices, 4 of which still survive today. The Madrid Codex, the Dresden, the Paris, and the Grolier. They're held in different places around the world. There were hundreds of others, but we still have 4 of these. The astrologers are interested in predicting the future for all kinds of reasons. Some days are lucky, things work out some days things don't work out well. You want to be able to predict the future. I'm in political science. We explain the past and we predict the future. And we have just about a perfect record on that. If all political scientists in the United States, maybe not all, 99% of them, predicted the election of Al Gore. It was an absolute certainty. So we almost always get it right. But predicting the future is something which is really important. You want to know what's coming down the pike. All right? If things are going to blow up, well, that's interesting. When should you plant those crops? How are you going to stave off the end of the world? When's a good day to do this and to do that? When's a good day to go to war? They had a star over Venus event. There's a 546-day Venus cycle, which they keep very careful track of. And for some reason, they think that makes a difference as to when you should go to war. But they have the Popol Vuh, which they're talking about. They've got these codices which are making predictions. And they also have other sources. The Chilam Balam of Chumayel is one of those colonial era sources, which it comes from the 17th and 18th hundreds. And there's a bunch of predictions there which come out of this tradition of wanting to make predictions of the future. And let's read some of the predictions so that we know what's coming down our way. The Quetzal shall come, the green bird shall come, Ah Cantanel, he of the yellow tree place shall come, blood vomit shall come, as it did the last Khatun, for how the Khatun just before the conquest. Okay, so that's what's coming. Or Kukulkan shall come with them for the second time. The word of God, the Itza shall come. Well, there's your prediction. So you can plan accordingly. What does that mean? It means something. It sounds like it means something. Blood vomit shall come doesn't sound good. So something bad sounds like it's coming down the pike. And it's coming on at the last Khatun on For Ahau. What are they talking about here? All right, well, let's take a segue a little bit into the Maya calendar and Maya arithmetic, because they love counting. If you've ever watched Sesame Street, they are Count Dracula, the original Count Draculas. They just love counting stuff, and they count all over the place. And it's not just the Maya, the Olmec. The Olmec is sort of the Mayas, Greek and Romans, the classic civilization. They came centuries before the Maya. They started the counting. But so this is kind of common throughout the Mesoamerican world, but the Maya really pick it up, and they love it. And of course, we like 10 fingers, right? So we have a decimal system. They like 10 fingers and 10 toes. So that's a decimal system. 20, it's based on 20. So we start with 1, and the next place is 10, and the next place is 100, the next place is 1,000, right? All right, they do it just opposite. The first row is 10, the second is 20, second's 400, and what is it, 800, or what is it, 8,000, and then 160,000, okay? So, and they write these things in rows. So, for example, well, if instead let me go back for a second. The shell is 0, and by the way, 0 is not nothing. 0 is kind of completion, fulfillment, an emergence of fullness, which I'll come back to in a minute. A dot is 1, a bar is 5. And you put them together, 2 dots is 2, up to 4 dots. Once you get to 4 dots, you go to a bar, 5. A bar and a dot is 6, and so on until and so on. And then you get up to 19, and you don't go to 20. You would go to 0. But in any case, so if you have 1 in the place where there's 160,000, that 1 equals 160,000. A 1 here would be 8,000. A 1 here would be 400. A 1 here would be 20. A 1 here would be 1. Or obviously 3 here is 3 times 160,000, 480,000. You get the point, basically, right? So in other words, now they didn't write their numbers like this. This is just easier for us. They wrote them like this. But we write the same thing just to make it easier for us to say this number here is 3, 10, 6, 13, 17. So for us, this number here is 3, 10, 6, 13, 17, and that equals 562,677 from our way of thinking. That's how you translate it. Does that sort of vaguely make sense? Believe me, math is something that usually escapes me, so if it doesn't make sense to you, you're in good company. But you get the idea that they count in 20s rather than in 10s, and then they have these placeholders so that it's 1 times 20, 20 times 2, 20 times 3, 20, so on. Okay, so, well, we can do a little addition here. So we have 6 plus 8 equals 14. Okay, clear enough. And now we have 1 in this place, so that's 1 of an 8,000. We have 14 of these, and each one is 400, so it's 14 times 400. Do I remember right? Is that 5,600? Have I done it right? Then you've got nothing here, and then you've got 7 here. And then you add that up with 16,000, 1,200, 0, and 14, And so you come up with this number, which is 31711, which is the same for us as 30,821. So that's just how you do the correspondences between Maya arithmetic and ours. So just put that in the back of your mind just for a minute. Then they have named days. They've got 20 days. We've got 7. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. They've got 20. Starts with Imish, and it goes Ik, Akbal, Khan, Chikchan, blah, 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 up until Ahau. There's 20 of these named days, okay? Okay, so, and what's, you can always tell when in the Maya hieroglyphs, when you've got a day, you may not know which day you've got, but you know you've got a day when there's the little old-fashioned television screen around it, because that's virtually always a day inside this cartouche here. And then each one has its own little pictures for it. But you got 20 named days. Then each, of course, these days has a meaning for us. Imish is crocodile, Ik is wind. Each one is associated with a direction. Each direction has kinds of meanings in it. Each one has a color associated with it. There's all kinds of meanings with these days, which is why you want to know what day you're on to decide when you're going to do what. And so you have to keep track of all of these things and what these different named days are going to be. Okay, so we got 20 days. We got 19 months in a year. 18 of which each have 20 days, but not those 20 named days. They do it with a number. So each of the month, Pop, Yo, Zip, Zot, Zek, Shul, each has 18 days until you get to the last month of the year, Wayeb, which is a 5-day. That's December 31st times 5, essentially. And that's the old man, right? The dying year. This is when the year dies, is during Wayeb, and this is the time where you want to do your rituals so you can give birth to the new year, because each year has that threat. Everything always has a threat of coming to an end, because death is part of stuff, right? I mean, death is part of life, and you smell it, and it's part of what's going on. So we ritualize that, and then we try to do the stuff which is necessary to give birth to the next period of time. Okay, 20 named days, 19 months, 18 of which have 18 days. The Maya love time. They love keeping track of time. They're always keeping track of time, and they have a bunch of different cycles. They're also intrigued by how cycles interact with each other. Of course, we got the daily cycle of the sun. They can't keep track of that. That's a day. They're fascinated by the lunar cycles, and they keep track of those lunar cycles. They're fascinated by the Venus cycle. They've got all kinds of cycles going on. And they're interested, they're kind of numerologists. They see the interactions between numbers, and they say, wow, is this cool? We got 20 fingers and toes, and then if you've noticed, in a solar year, you've entered into the 13th lunar cycle. So as with many pre-Christian and pre-Judaic agricultural societies, 13 is a sacred number because of that. You're in the 13th lunar cycle in your solar year. So that's got to be a good number. So they have 13 numbers which they pair up with those 20 named days. So if the first number is 1, and the first day is Imish, one day is 1 Imish. We don't have an exact equivalent to that in our calendar. So the next day, by the way, this is for our visualization, they didn't do this. The next day would be 2 Ik. And then the next day is 3 Akbal and 4 Khan. And you get up until you have 13 Ben. And then the next day is 1 Ish. Right? All right. And so they just keep corresponding numbers to named days. And so they say today is 4 Khan or 1 Ish or whatever. It's 260 days by the time you get back to 1 Imish. And this is the Solkin or the ritual calendar, and there's speculations as to what the origins is like. This goes back 1,500 years before the Maya. The Olmec are doing this kind of stuff as well. Mesoamerica is really interested by this 13 times 20. 13 lunar cycles, 20 digits, 260 days. What do you do if you miss your period for a few days? You're virtually at 260 days, or just a little under 9 months, and so that equals the human gestation. It's a nice way of keeping track of when you can expect to give birth. And they say, wow, that's cool. There's a connection between lunar cycles and the numbers of digits I've got, and how long the human gestation period. This is all related to each other in their mind. All right, so they've got the Solkin, the ritual calendar. That's one of them. Then they've got a couple more. This will come to an end, I promise. They have the Hab, or the annual cycle. Remember those 18 months? In the same way that we connected a number and a name day, there's 20 numbers for each day within the month. So there's one kumku, 2 kumku, 3 kumku. That we have. Today's the 21st of March. That's what they would say. Today's the 8th of kumku, or the 8 kumku. But then when you get to 19 kumku, or go the month before. You go to the last day, the 19th of Kayeb, the month before Kumku. You don't go to the 20th of Kumku. You go to the seeding of, you don't go to the 20th of Kayeb. You go to the seeding or 0 Kumku. Now that's important because that's the shell Kumku is the seeding of Kumku, which is actually the last day of Kayeb, which means the end is the beginning. Right? If you're keeping track of time right. Now, they combine these two things just to make it more complicated because it creates another cycle, which they think is very cool. They combine the number and the named days with the number of the month. And so they will say, today is 4 Hao, 8 Kumku, which is an important date, and we'll talk about why. And then they keep going around. The next one is 5 name day, 9 kumku. By the time they get back to 4 Hao, 8 kumku, they've gone 52 years. So there's a calendar round, a 52-year cycle. So they've got monthly cycles, they got lunar cycles, they got solar cycles, they've got annual year cycles, they've got Solkin cycles, they've got 52-year calendar round cycles, and they're always keeping track of how these interact with each other to know when they're supposed to do what they're supposed to do, and how you're going to properly stave off the end times and give birth to the next period of time. All right, so this is all, they're keeping track of all this stuff. That's just another graphic for the same thing. All right, now they've got one more cycle. Just we're almost at the end of this, I promise, really, I promise. They've got the long count. This isn't a cycle of just a year or a month or even 52 years. This is a cycle or a period of time that goes on for centuries and centuries. This is the date that everyone's excited about now. All right, so let's think about how they think of time. They start with 1 day. Their next period of time is that Hab, that month, which is 20 days. Then they've got a Tun, which is a year. Now, they don't do the whole 19 months with the 365 days. By the way, they knew that it didn't match up, but they didn't have fractions, so they didn't know what to do with that quarter-daily day. They didn't have leap year. But they knew that over time, all of a sudden, this Hab calendar didn't match the seasons, and they had to make adjustments as a result of that. But their Tun, their year, they only used that 18 months with 20 days, so a Tun is 360 days. Then they have a Katun, which is a period of 20 tuns, or 7,200 days. And then they have a Baktun, which is 20 Katuns, or 144,000 days. And, well, let's go to the next one. So that's their periods of time. They've got larger periods of time, too. They've got the Keen, the Hab, the Winao, the Tun, the Katun, the Baktun. They also have the Piktun, which is 20 Baktuns, the Kalab Tun, which is 20, and blah, blah, blah. And they've got numbers even above that, but I forget what the names are. So they've got all these time periods, and they're keeping track of all of this stuff. By the way, if you look at this comes from the panel at Palenque. You may not know what all of this stuff says, but you can start seeing they're doing a lot of counting here, right? Here's a bar and 4 dots because they can put it on the side or they can put it horizontally. Here's 3 bars and 3 dots. Here's 2 bars. They got a lot of numbers here. They're counting something here. And then remember our cartouches? Here we've got the little television screen with something in there. So it's 4 something day. So they're counting all kinds of, they're keeping records of all kinds of stuff here. And what they love to do is something happened on this day, and they give all the dates for it. And then they say, and it was so many days until there was another date, and then something happened here. I mean, that's sort of the standard thing on their glyphs. This was so much so that Eric Thompson, one of the big shots in this field half a century ago, was sure that they were time worshippers, because all they ever talked about was time. What they were doing was keeping track of when important events happened according to their sponsors, which were kings. So usually it had to do when somebody came to power, when they had carried out some battle, when they did something really important. And that's what they're doing. And anyway, these dates have been around for a long time. Here's the oldest date in the New World, by the way. This is an Olmec statue, which is making reference to 32 BC. It seems to have been made about that time, and there's an Olmec statue. That's the Greeks and the Romans. That's the people the Mayas look back to as fantastic. So these calendar systems have been around for a long time. All right, now, so the first day of our current creation period, since humanity was successfully created, unlike the people of mud and the people of wood and so on, took place on that wonderful sacred day of 4 Ahau 8 Kunku, which is the last 13,0000. Well, there was an end of the world before that. So could there be this time? That's the origins of where people are getting, supposedly nervous if you're going to take this interpretation of what the Maya seriously. And in our calendar, that's equivalent to August 11, 3114 BC. So that's when the creation of our world took place. And then the next day, you add 1 to this, and that long count day is 1 day since the beginning of the last 13th Baktun, and you record that 00001. That was 5 Imish, 9 Kunku, or August 12th, and then you go from there. Now that's a long time ago. The Maya weren't around then. Most of what they're doing happens in the 9th Baktun, for example. But in any case, what we're coming up to is 12, 19, 19, 17, 19, which is 3 Kawak, 2 Kankin, which is December 20th, and then the big day is 13,0000, which is 4 Ahau, 3 Kankin. And that's supposedly then the beginning. Are we going to go here? Actually, there's no guarantee that we're going to go here. Maybe we're going to go to 13,0001 and work our way up to the 20th Baktun. There's no guarantee. I mean, it's not clear from the records what they're thinking about. All right, here's a stela from Quirigua, which has a great story, but I guess I won't tell it to you. But this is Quirigua's gives an account of what happened at 9, right? 17,000. That's the long count day that we've got here. These things are Baktun, Katun, Tun, Hab, and Keen. So the long count date is 9/17,000. Then you've got the number and cartouche, so that's 13 Ahau. That's the name of the day. Then you've got some other stuff. You've got some lunar glyphs in here. You've got the various, Lords of the Night, which is another calendrical system. Sometimes they'll stick in an 819 day count, which they can throw in there. And they've got other cycles. This time, mercifully, they don't do that. And then they finally get to the number and the name of the month, 18 Kumku. So this whole stela, and these stelas, they can get to be 30 feet high. They spend a lot of time carving these things. I mean, for some reason, this matters to them. They spent all of this time just telling you what day it is. But that's because the meanings of days and the meanings of times are so rich in their cultural system. Here's another stela from also Quirigua, which is telling us what happened the last time it was 13,000. And here we are. This is just a drawing of it. It's a little easier to see. 13 13 peak or a Baktun, 0 Hab, 0, 0, 0. And so the last time was 13, 0, 0, 0, 0. What happened on 4 Ahau, 8 Kumku? The hearth was manifested. Well, that's exciting. What does that mean? Well, what they're referring to is that the gods set up the house. What's the first thing you do when you set up your house? And you build your house, and you have some sticks, and you put a thatched roof on it. Then what do you want to do? You want to cook something, some tortillas or something or other. So you put 3 stones down, because 3 always creates a nice even plane. 4 you have to fiddle with forever to make sure something's not wobbling all the time. But if you put 3 down, you can get a nice flat plane, and you can put your pots on that and start cooking. So what did the gods do on that day? They put 3 stones up in the sky and set up housekeeping. And they've had 3 stars up there, which is the hearth. So that's the hearth was manifested. That's what happened the last time. It was the gods set up house. Doesn't sound too deadly. Here's a very fancy drawing. The Maya hate empty space. They just love filling up with all kinds of stuff, right? So this is a pot, and this is just a rollout of it. If you rolled it out, this is what the pot would look like. And this is telling you on 4 Ahau, 8 Kumku, all of this stuff is happening. What's happening? Well, the black at center god, the sky place god, the earth god, many strides god, Balone, the 3 born together gods, tree, deer god, jaguar tree, and so on. All of these threesomes are doing stuff, whatever they're doing on 4 Ahau, 8 Kumku. But a lot of stuff is going on here. It was a big day. We know it's important. And they're bundling things here. They're putting bundles together. And they're very busy. Everybody's very busy on this day, setting up shop. All right, so 13,000, big deal. Are there any other dates that are a big deal? But we know already that that's not when time began, because there were all these other creation periods before that. So we know that time actually goes much further back than that. In fact, it goes really far back. At Koba, there's Stela 1. It's a terrible picture of it. But the date here, basically this is a nice long calendrical date. And it's this many years. I have no idea what that number is. I mean, it's 41 Cooper quadrillion, 943 something gazillion years in the past. That's the date, and then it goes down and they get the exact day that it's on. That's how much time it's been since something happened. And what something isn't so important, but they're imagining an incredibly long period of time, so that not everything got created at that 13,000 last time. And even though you've had periods of creation and destruction since then, it hasn't been complete and total, but there's been plenty of death and destruction along the way. All right, just a couple more things. Palenque is a fantastic site. If you're ever going to go looking around different cities, you got to go to Palenque. This is some of the ruins from that. Uh-oh. Could be frozen. Destruction in my PowerPoint. Cannot open the file. Okay. Interesting. Let's try again. At Palenque, this is where Pical is buried. Here's Pical. He's a big shot king. This is his sarcophagus lid, by the way. It's about 8 feet by 12 feet, so it's a pretty big stone thing. I mention it just because, first of all, I think it's really cool. But it's got this idea of the end and the beginning all in one. The Maya idea of truth, by the way, is a little different from ours. Truth for us is coherent and non-contradictory. Truth is one, right? So our motto here at Villanova is Veritas, truth, and the next one is Unitas, unity. So truth is one. As Soren Kierkegaard says, purity of heart is to will one thing, right? For the Maya, they don't understand that. What they're saying is truth is the dynamic relationship among opposites. They're fascinated by the movement that results from the relationship between things that are very different from each other. Male, female, life, death, nighttime, daytime, planting, dying, or whatever it is. So they're fascinated by the movement between opposites. And here's Pical on his sarcophagus, on his tombstone, on his coffin. This thing sitting on top of it. And here's our hero. Here's Pical. He's wearing a turtle shell, right? And he's dressed up. He's all very nice, and it looks like he's falling, doesn't it? Which is very interesting because Maya kings usually are portrayed very stiffly. They're usually portrayed like this, very dignified and profile to the side. And this guy is really moving, which is interesting. And he's kind of falling down. What's he falling into? Look at all this stuff here. Big teeth. He's falling down into his grave. And why are there big teeth there? Mother Earth is ready to eat him up. The Aztecs' Coatlicue, which is the earth goddess, is a wonderful representation of the earth. She's got pendulous breasts, very nurturing and all of that. She's also got the most fearsome teeth you've ever seen on anybody because it's a fair deal, isn't it? She gives birth to plants and we eat that stuff. We eat from her our whole lives. At the end of our lives, we dig a hole, we go into her, and she eats us up. You don't know that? Dig yourself up in a few months and see what you look like. The flesh is cleared, right? Fair is fair. We eat her, she eats us. It works out in the end. So he's going down into Mother Earth, and she's going to just gobble him up. And that's not a very happy scene. Now, this is sort of a depressing thing, but one which you would expect from that. But what else is going on exactly at the same moment? You've got the world tree. The world tree is always in the center of the universe and it's holding up the sky. And it's coming right up out of his belly button or somewhere around there. And he's also, so at the same moment, he's going down into the underworld. He's being given rebirth because look at that position he's in. That's the birth position, isn't it? He's straining to give birth to what? What do snakes do? Why are snakes so cool? Because every year their skin dies, right? And they have to molt from it. They got to wiggle out of it. And it looks like they've died and given rebirth to themselves. So what's he doing? He's behaving just like a snake. And he's giving rebirth to himself, which is why we know he's pretty cool and pretty powerful. And just at the moment of death, he's in the moment of rebirth. He's on his way up the world tree. Who's up here? The feathered serpent, I mean the quetzal. The quetzal is a big important bird. We were just talking about that. You see his nice long tail. It really is a real bird. The quetzal has like a 3 or 4 foot tail. It's some incredible, it's a beautiful blue-green bird. And when it flies through the sky, its tail goes like this. It sure looks like a feathered serpent that's flying through the sky from their view. So it's clearly a really important bird up there. And that's where he lives up in the sky, and that's where Pical is on his way. So at that very moment, and at the moment of his burial, we're seeing his rebirth all at one time. So it's this, the end is the beginning. Zero is the seeding of Pical up in the sky. That's the idea. There's all kinds of texts. He's buried down at the bottom of the temple of the inscription. Up at the top of the temple and the inscription, this is only one of the texts. This is the one I showed you before, where there's all kinds of numbers and days and all kinds of stuff here. And it's giving a cosmological story, placing Pical in his place in the great cosmological story. But what's important for our point here is that there's a date which goes back 1.2 million years in the past, which isn't even close to what Koba was doing with their gazillions, quadrillion years before that, but that's still a long time ago. And they have a date which corresponds to 4772 AD, which is 2760 years after 2012. So whoever wrote this is imagining a future which goes on after 2012, which apparently means, at least according to the guy who's commemorating Pical, time doesn't end completely in 2012, which doesn't say that it could be trouble either, that you might have to give rebirth along the way. But he's imagining that. Okay, so big deal. It's just the typical academic game of finding two examples that are exceptions to the rule. Okay, we have Koba, we've got this thing at Palenque talking about dates beyond or the usual 130000. But we've got hundreds of Maya sites, hundreds and hundreds of carved text, painted text, written text, all kinds of text with all kinds of dates. They're very interested in prediction. They're very interested in what's going to happen. There's got to be all kinds of things about the end of the world and all kinds of different inscriptions about what's going to happen on 13000 because the world's going to end then and it really matters. And there's a total of one. In the whole Maya world, there's one reference to 13000. The reason I harangued you with all of that calendrical stuff was to try to impress you that the Maya really cared about keeping track of time and thought a lot about predicting stuff, that this seemed to matter to them. Were they right? Were they wrong? I don't know, but they sure cared about it. And they spent a lot of time and effort keeping track of time. They thought it was part of the holy obligation which kept them alive. The gods didn't destroy us because we keep track of the days and do the right stuff on the right times. So it matters to them. And you would think if they were predicting the end of the world, they might talk about it if time was so important to them. And what's the prediction? Well, this is the key prediction, right? On 13000, the whole world blows up. And so at least one guy got it right. But that's not what he predicts. What does he predict? On the 13th Baktun, when that comes to an end, it'll be 4 Hau, 3rd Kankin, and it will happen, darkness. That's the prediction. That's about the equivalent of me predicting that at 2999, at the end of this coming millennium, that will take place on December 31st, and night will fall. That's the prediction. The one prediction in the Maya world. So are they predicting? Is Maya civilization worried about what's going to happen on 13000? No. They could care less. They don't talk about it. It's nowhere around. Which isn't to say that I don't love the movie 2012. It's a fun movie. I love blowing up movies, you know. But the Maya are not predicting the end of the world on the 21st of December, although it's a lot more fun to talk about it. It really is. But that's, so that's the extent of the prediction. It's going to end on that day, and there will be nighttime at the end of the day. Okay, not very exciting. Is there an end, though? Is there something to this, or is this just sort of funny stuff? Sort of, who cares? You know, the Maya were entertaining, but they're not really saying anything of real interest or value. And I think actually there is something important to be learned here. This is one of the many murals at Bonampak. Did the Maya imagine an end to their world? And the answer is yes. They, as we've said now a number of times, the ends of periods were part of what they experienced. The end of their civilization was something that they experienced. They started going to war against each other incessantly in the end of the 9th Baktun. For different reasons. There seemed to have been an environmental disaster. One thing they liked to do was all those temples, you know, if you've ever been down there to Chichen Itza or any of these places, it's all rough-hewn rock right now, right? Which is not how it looked when the Maya were there, because they always covered it with this limestone or paste which they made somehow by digging up limestone, because that's what everything is made of in the region, and then creating fires and mixing it with water and grinding it up and so on. And it makes a nice paste which you cover all of those pyramids and all of those buildings and all of the plazas with. So everything's covered with a nice fine white smooth surface, which you could paint red. And red's important because that's the color of blood, and blood is the color of life. And so it's all an affirmation of life. And you want to do sacrifices, get blood out of yourself, because that's how Ishmukane mixed it with the corn and made humanity. And it's all about creation. Sometimes you get blood out of sacrificial victims, and that's not so nice. And that can happen too. And this is what's not so nice. But in any case, what I was saying is all of this limestone covering which they put on their buildings meant that they had to boil a lot of water, which meant they had to burn lots of trees. They cleared the countryside of forests. Now when you go down there, who made Star Wars? At the beginning of Star Wars, they show Palenque, and it comes up out of the trees and all of that kind of. I'm sorry? George Lucas, yeah. He's got a picture, I think it's Palenque, and it's the buildings of Palenque emerging from all of these forests. By the end of the Classic period, there were no forests. There were no trees. They had cut them all down. And this limestone surface, which is a very thin layer of dirt, they were suffering from erosion. Agricultural production seems to have fallen off. The burials seem to indicate that there's dietary distress, which is becoming more common. Was the end of time coming? Yeah, you bet it was, and they were experiencing it. So here we've got one scene of war. These poor fellows are getting tortured here. This poor fellow's been decapitated. This guy's just gotten his fingernails ripped out and he's dripping blood. This is a torture scene on Bonaparte, recognizing, and here's the big shot king over his unfortunate victim. And Bonaparte isn't the only one. There's great struggles going on between Calendrical and Pical. There's all kinds of wars that are going on, and between the wars and the environmental disaster, we start to have a real crisis in the Maya world, which is indicated by this, I think, really poignant altar at Copan. There's another altar, Altar D, which is a fabulous altar at Copan of 16 guys, kind of George Washington handing the baton from one leader to the next until finally the baton is given to the current king. And so it's a record of the succession of power. And the most recent king in Copan was going to make the next altar, which was going to give him the power. And so the guy comes and he starts carving this thing, but then this side is completely clear. And the Maya hate clear space. They don't leave clear space on purpose. And this is the last altar that's made. By the way, they're called altars because the Spanish thought that they looked like altars when they came. They're not altars, they're thrones. But there's the term stuck, and so everybody still calls them altars. But the king would sit up here, and then all of this stuff around would be giving his legitimacy for why he should be ruling. But what happened here is the carver just walked away. He said, the heck with it. I don't believe this stuff anymore, or something happened, or there was some revolt, or something, whatever it was, whatever the explanation is. He started out with the best of intentions, carving this, and he quit. And that's the last altar there is at Copan. On the equivalent to 822. After that, there is no more. There's the collapse of Copan. The last recorded date is in Tonina, which is on the equivalent of 15 January 909. The end of the world came. And it came maybe because of what they did to themselves. It lasted in the Yucatan a little longer. Chichen Itza and Uxmal and so on lasted until about 1200, and then that came to an end too. 300 years or 200 years or whatever before the Spanish showed up. So they did experience the end of the world, and but it's not the end of the Maya. It's the end of carving this kind of stuff and building big stone temples. But it's the end of classic civilization. Then you had another end of the world. The Spanish showed up. Here's an illustration from De las Casas' book, which became the source of the so-called Black Legend, all the terrible stories about how awful the Spanish were, and I suppose they were. Most of the 95% of the Indians or the indigenous Americans who died after the Spanish showed up died of smallpox and other things that they didn't quite understand. But some of it was a result of deliberate mistreatment, and here you have Spanish conquistadors stories, chopping off hands and so on. And that was the end of the world too. Here we have David Rivera's famous painting, Diego Rivera's famous painting of the Spanish conquest. And for the Maya, one of the specific stories comes from Diego de Landa, who went there to convert the Maya. He actually was a very careful observer. He wrote a book, the Relación de las Causas de Yucatán, which is actually an excellent book. In fact, one of the ways that we were able to translate the ancient Maya text was from the syllabary, which he developed. And he kept all kinds of careful records. But he got irritated that the Maya, even after having been converted, kept practicing some of their pagan beliefs and practices. And it bugged him. And he really got irritated. And then when he discovered that they were hoarding some of their sacred books and some of their sacred relics in their homes, and then practicing Catholic religion in public, he got pretty ticked off. And so he dragged libraries full of their books out in front of the church at Mani, and he burned them. And he wrote, "We found many books with these letters, with their hieroglyphs, and because they contained nothing that was free from superstition and the devil's trickery, we burnt them," which the Indians greatly lamented. Why? Who knows, but they seem to be upset by this, which really is a shame. I mean, the whole library is full of codices are gone. Now we've got 4, which were carted off. So is that the end of the world? Well, yeah. From one point of view, it sure seems like it. Okay, that was in the colonial period. In the contemporary period, the end of the world comes often enough anyway. At least if you're a parent, about half of children die, and 10 times higher than the national average even for that. We have all kinds of problems with unclean water adding to this. Does the end of the world come for an awful lot of families for the Maya? Yeah, that doesn't seem to be too uncommon. Is there still environmental and erosional problems and all kinds of a lack of clean water and all sorts of issues in the contemporary Maya world leading to the ends? Do we have hurricanes? Does that house necessarily look like it's going to withstand a hurricane well? Isn't the end of the world something that they have experienced frequently? In the 1980s, in the years when I was in graduate school, the world came to an end for a lot of Maya too. 200,000 people or so, mostly Maya, were killed in the civil wars of primarily Guatemala, but also in other regions. 200,000 people, 9,000. Now comparing mortality is a little bit obscene, and it's always absurd, but it's still worthwhile thinking about. 9,000 people have been killed in Syria in this most recent disaster that we've been going through. What, about 2,500 or so were killed in 9/11. 53,000 casualties at Gettysburg. 200,000 were killed in this small area in the 1980s. Is that the end of the world? Pretty darn close to it. So you've had repeated ends of the world, mythologically, in terms of periods of time, with the people of mud and the people of wood and whatnot, historically, with the conquest and with auto-da-fés and with genocides of some point. And in spite of that, you have in more contemporary, I have been going down from time to time down to Penn. There's a hieroglyphic workshop. Some guys who actually know how to translate hieroglyphs. And one of them is a Maya woman who likes to talk about, she grew up in Guatemala in the 80s, and she likes to talk about how they weren't permitted to speak any of the Maya dialects, and there's at least 31 of them. They weren't permitted to read the Popol Vuh or the Chilam Balam or the codices. And she says, and now they are. They weren't permitted to wear their customary dress, their huipiles, which are these wonderfully woven tops with all kinds of cosmological meanings. And now they are. They couldn't read the ancient Maya text for a long time, but starting in the 70s, well, actually starting before that, there was a famous Russian, of all things, during the Cold War, a fellow by the name of Konoresev, who started the translation. But in the 70s, you had Linda Sheely, and David Friedel and others, who I think one of the fun detective stories of all time is the way that they were able to translate all of those crazy glyphs that we were looking at. So now they're pretty confident. They've got 85% or so of that, and they can read that text. And so now Maya are able to hear from their ancestors. You've had a resurgence of Maya culture, and well, here they are with some of their huipiles, and each area, each town has its own style, their colors and their designs, and they talk about it in great detail, and they talk about its symbolic meaning with the different flowers and the different shapes, and they'll talk about how this is the sun and this is the four-cornered earth and all kinds of things that they'll talk about. But clothing is a big deal. They don't get it off the rack, they make it and they think about it. And if you think weaving is really boring, it is until you start imagining all kinds of mythological significance with what you're doing. So what have we seen? We've seen the end of the world, and we've seen its rebirth, I think. And I find that incredibly impressive. And I haven't faced anything like that sort of end of the world in my own life, and I really admire what they've been able to do. So is there a contemporary meaning for the Maya for this story of life, birth, life, death, and rebirth? I think they've lived it out in some pretty significant ways. Could they worry about another end of the world, and what could it possibly mean to us? My wife accuses me of being a pessimist, and I think I am. I'm always expecting the worst to happen, which is why I'm generally in a good mood, because it turns out better than I ever expected. But you know, when you look around and you think, oh my gosh, we got a $15 trillion debt, and the country's going to hell in the handbasket, and you know, the end of the American empire is on its way, and the great hopes of the founding period have been dashed, and this is where it's all headed. You know, are we looking to the end of the world? Well, it's a little dramatic, isn't it? But will there be a resurgence? Yes, so we can all leave here feeling optimistic. Your end isn't as bad as their ends, is my guess. Or at least mine hasn't been. Maybe yours was. And if they can have a rebirth, well, maybe we can too, and I find that quite inspiring. And maybe not a story to dismiss. So the 22nd of December doesn't worry me too much, but that message of hope I find to be quite inspiring. You've all been very patient, you haven't all left, and so I appreciate that, so thanks for coming. And
Take some questions.
sure, not that I can answer them, but yeah.
In looking at these cultures or civilization, did they decline from within? It looks like externally, like a great flood. You know, we look at Toynbee. Toynbee looks at history and culture, saying that almost all of them declined from within. Well, so they're an exception.
Well, I mean, it seems to me that they did decline from within. I mean, you know, we have this mythology that Native Americans take care of the environment. Maybe they do sometimes, but the Maya didn't. I think they caused a lot of environmental destruction. They were often thought of as peaceful. The Maya, Eric Thompson loved the Maya because he was convinced that they were the Athens of, not that the Athenians were always so peaceful, but they were the Athens of Mesoamerica, and that they were peaceful. Well, but they weren't. So they could be, especially towards the end of the classic period. They were warlike. They had destroyed their environment. Yeah, they collapsed from within primarily, I think.
When you refer to the Mayan, do they have cultural centers, or where do most of them live?
Well, yeah. There's some 8 million or so Maya who still live, and they live throughout Guatemala, Chiapas, Belize, some in Honduras, and it's one of these names. There was never an organized Maya political entity like a Roman Empire where they had it all organized. There's a cultural area which they share a lot of language and a lot of religious attitudes and mythologies and so on. But 31 different dialects which are as different as French and Italian and Spanish, and so you know you don't just easily move from one to the next. But they certainly are part of the same language family. They're part of the same cultural family. And now, of course, yeah, there's all kinds of, you go down there and they've got endless numbers of museums and cultural centers and places to study art and produce textiles and women's cooperatives and all kinds of things of this nature. All kinds of contemporary religious issues. My favorite was Mashibon. That was a great cultural center. And this fellow who's really a manifestation of one of the Maya gods. I didn't show you at Palenque. There's this god, a great god. He's always smoking a cigar, and Mashimon is this fellow who you go there, and he's this fellow who's seated up in a kind of a lounge chair, and you can put a cigar in his lips and pour some whiskey down his throat. And this is the kind of god you want to hang out with. He's a pretty fun guy, but so there's kind of contemporary cultural centers of this nature. So yeah, I mean it's in that sense it's a very vibrant ethnic community. I don't know if that's
They're a success story because they survived. They're destroying their environment. They survived what the Spaniards did to them. And the Spaniards brought syphilis, smallpox, and measles in. And they also enslaved a lot of them. In fact, you saw that Bishop Lando was tried back in Spain. He was tried because of his mistreatment of the Indians, not because the Spaniards loved the Indians, just because he was losing slaves. They wanted to enslave them all, and he was killing them.
he wasn't convicted of anything. He was sent back and made bishop.
Yeah.
But he was a Dominican.
So-
That was the whole problem.
So they survived all of this, and now they're a thriving population, in spite of all the problems. They still have that geographic area.
Yeah, so I mean, from that point of view, it is the realization of the Popol Vuh value of recreation, and that's what strikes me about it. Yeah. Sure.
Towards the end, was it Pical?
Pical,
He was
uh-huh.
dying, essentially,
Right.
he was being reborn in a tree and everything. On that picture where he's like in the birth thing,
Uh-huh.
it looked like somebody was putting something into his eye. Does that mean anything? To me, it looked like a spike of something was going into.
Spikes in the eye are not good,
No,
no.
spikes in the eye. I just looked like it meant something.
Let's see. Oh, I see. No, that's yeah. This also is the moment of death because very often little bubbles are put or little things are put around the nose, and what that is, it's the spirit leaving your nose just at the moment of death. So yeah, he's not getting a spike up the nose, but that's probably his.
Okay, I thought that was more like his eye, but you're saying.
Oh, the eye. Oh no. Here's his eye here, and here's his nose, and here's his lips. It's not a terribly great picture. Is that what you're saying or not? Oh, are you saying this thing here?
No, the thing to the left.
This thing here?
Yeah, that.
Yeah, no, my guess is, I don't know, but my guess is that's the moment of death where the spirits, the breath is leaving the body. Now, and remember, actually, we have that difference within our own religious tradition. In the Old Testament, they refer to the breath or the wind of God. It's not till the Christians come along they talk about the Spirit of God. So it's the breath that blows open the Red Sea. Here you got the breath. That's where the life is in the breath, which then out it comes. I mean, your speculation is good as mine, but I think that's maybe what's going on. But yeah, I love this lid. I think it's really one of the great. Oh, this is also one of the little cultural differences.
Rubbings are these?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. Are there rubbings?
Do people do rubbings?
I guess so. I don't know that I've seen rubbing. This is a drawing of it. You can get pictures of it. The problem is when you go down there, you can look into this very crowded little room, and so you can, if you take a picture, you get it on an angle, and then you bring it home, and you can barely make heads or tails out of it. So people who have drawn them make it a lot easier to figure out what's going on. Well, there's all kinds of other imagery in there, but you've heard enough about that. Yeah, we don't want to spike his eye. That's bad manners. Well, I've kept you long enough, so.